The crack of breaking wood shattered the early morning silence as Eleanor Hartwell watched her last chair splinter into pieces against the cabin wall. Her husband Robert stood in the doorway, his bags already loaded onto the waiting wagon, while their 4 children huddled in the corner like frightened deer. 3 days before the first winter storm was due to hit Oregon territory, and he was leaving them with nothing but broken furniture and empty promises. "You can't do this," Ellie whispered, her voice barely audible over 4-year-old Mary's quiet. Sobbing, "The children need their father, winter's coming, and we have no meat stored, no firewood cut. You can't just abandon us here to die." Robert's face remained cold, unmoved by the desperation in his wife's eyes. "I never wanted this life, Eleanor. Should have stayed in Chicago where you belonged. This frontier's no place for a banker's daughter, playing at being a pioneer." He turned without another word, climbing onto the wagon beside the woman from town who'd turned his head with promises of California gold. As the wagon wheels creaked away through the frost-covered grass, Ellie stood, frozen in the doorway of their cabin, watching her former life disappear down the muddy track. The weight of their situation crashed down on her shoulders like an avalanche. 4 children depending on her, winter approaching fast, and not a scrap of preserved food in their larder. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away through dense forest, and the town of Willow Creek had made it clear they had no sympathy for abandoned wives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the pines like ghostly fingers as Eleanor gathered her children around the rough-hewn table that had survived Robert's destructive departure. Thomas, her eldest at 11, sat with shoulders squared, trying to be the man his father had failed to be. Grace, 9 years old, with her mother's determined green eyes, held little Mary on her lap, while 7-year-old Samuel twisted his hands nervously in his lap. "Listen to me, all of you," Ellie began, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Your father has made his choice, and we cannot change that. But we are Hartwells, and Hartwells do not surrender." She looked at each of her children's faces, seeing fear mixed with trust. "We have 3 days before the storms begin, 3 days to prepare for winter, or—" She didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what happened to families caught unprepared by an Oregon winter. The previous year, the Donaldson family had been found frozen in their cabin when the spring thaw came, their pantry bare, their woodpile exhausted. "But Mama," Samuel's voice quavered, "Papa always brought the food. He hunted and traded in town. We don't know how to do those things." Eleanor felt the truth of his words like a physical blow. Robert had insisted on maintaining the traditional roles, keeping her confined to domestic duties while he handled all matters of provision and protection. She could bake bread if she had flour, tend a garden if she had seeds, mend clothes if she had thread. But hunting, trapping, trading with the sometimes hostile townspeople, these were foreign territories to her. Thomas straightened in his chair. "I can learn to hunt, Mama. Papa showed me how to load the rifle once." "Once isn't enough, son," Ellie replied gently. "And your father took both rifles with him." "We have. His old fowling piece, but hardly any powder or shot." She rose from the table, moving to the window where she could see the dark wall of forest that surrounded their clearing. "No, we need to think differently. We need help." Grace spoke up, her young voice carrying surprising authority. "The Pike, woman at the general store, won't give us credit. She told Betty Morrison's mother that abandoned women are bad for business." The words stung, but Ellie had expected no less from Augusta Pike, whose pinched face and sharp tongue had made her the moral arbiter of Willow Creek. The woman had barely tolerated the Hartwells when Robert was present, viewing them as outsiders despite their 2 years in Bear Hollow. Now, without a man's protection, they would be treated as pariahs. Then we go around Mrs. Pike, Ellie decided. Thomas, you and Grace will come with me to town. We'll speak to Reverend Colton first. Surely a man of God won't turn away children in need. She turned to Samuel and Mary. You two will stay here and begin gathering what you can from the garden. There should be some potatoes still in the ground, and the wild apple tree by the creek might have fruit the bears haven't taken. Mary's bottom lip trembled. What if the bears come while you're gone? They won't, Ellie said with more confidence than she felt. Bears are preparing for winter just like us. They're too busy eating to bother with little girls. She knelt before her youngest, smoothing her dark curls. Besides, Samuel will protect you. Won't you, Sam? The 7-year-old nodded solemnly, pride temporarily overcoming his fear. Ellie rose and moved to the mantel where Robert had kept his ammunition pouch. Her fingers found 3 paper cartridges and a handful of lead shot, enough for perhaps 4 loads if she was careful. She tucked these into her apron pocket, along with their last 2 silver dollars, hidden from Robert's greedy departure. The walk to Willow Creek took them along Pine River, where the salmon should have been running if the season hadn't been so dry. Ellie noticed the absence of jumping fish, another source of winter food now lost to them. Thomas walked ahead, carrying a stick like a rifle, while Grace stayed close to her mother's side. Mama, Grace said quietly, why did Papa leave us? Did we do something wrong? The question Ellie had dreaded hung in the autumn air between them. How could she explain adult selfishness to a 9-year-old? How could she describe the slow poison of resentment that had grown in Robert's heart as his dreams of easy frontier? Wealth crumbled against the reality of hard work and isolation. No, sweetheart, she finally answered. Sometimes people lose their way. Your father came west looking for something he couldn't find, and when he didn't find it here, he decided to look elsewhere. She squeezed Grace's hand. But that's his. Failing, not ours. We didn't come west just for gold or easy living. We came to build a home. Thomas had stopped ahead of them, his attention focused on something in the underbrush. He held up his hand for silence, then pointed to fresh tracks. In the mud. Elk, he whispered. Big one too. Probably heading to the high meadows. Ellie studied the deep imprints, calculating. A single elk could feed them for weeks if properly preserved, but tracking such game required skills she didn't possess. The frustration of seeing sustenance so close, yet so unreachable, nearly brought tears to her eyes. Come on, she said, pulling her children forward. Let's see what Christian charity can do for us. Willow Creek appeared through the trees like a collection of weathered boxes scattered along a muddy main street. The settlement had grown around a sawmill and trading post, attracting farmers, loggers, and failed miners who couldn't afford to continue to California. Wooden sidewalks kept pedestrians above the worst of the mud, while hand-painted signs advertised goods and services most couldn't afford. The church stood at the far end of town, its white paint peeling, but its steeple still proud against the grey sky. Reverend Colton's house adjoined it, smoke rising from the chimney suggesting warmth and comfort within. As they approached, Ellie noticed curtains twitching in windows along Main Street. By evening, everyone in Willow Creek would know that the abandoned Hartwell woman had come begging. She lifted her chin higher and knocked firmly on the Reverend's door. Mrs. Colton answered, her round face shifting from welcome to wariness as she recognized her visitors. Eleanor, she said, not inviting them in. We heard about your situation. Good morning, Martha, Ellie replied, maintaining her dignity. I was hoping to speak with the Reverend about the church's winter charity drive. Henry's at the lumber camp, Mrs. Colton said quickly. Won't be back until Sunday. She glanced nervously over her shoulder. And I'm afraid the charity drive is only for established members of the congregation. The words hit Ellie like cold water. The Hartwells had attended services sporadically, Robert preferring to spend Sundays working their claim or hunting. "Surely you make exceptions for children facing starvation." Martha Colton's face reddened. "That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? Besides, if we helped every abandoned woman, we'd only encourage more men to shirk their responsibilities." She began to close the door. "I suggest you write to your family back east. They're better positioned to help than we are." The door shut with quiet finality. Thomas kicked at a stone, sending it skittering across the yard. "Christians," he muttered with a bitterness too old for his years. "Thomas," Ellie warned, though she shared his sentiment. She turned to see Grace's face crumpling with disappointment and quickly knelt to embrace her. "It's all right, darling. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We'll find another way." But as they walked back toward Main Street, Eleanor felt the weight of their situation pressing down harder. The church had been her best hope for legitimate aid. Now she faced the prospect of begging from merchants who already viewed her as a liability. Pike's General Store dominated the center of town, its false front rising a full story above its actual roofline in typical frontier pretension. Augusta Pike stood in the doorway as if she'd been waiting for them, her thin lips pursed in disapproval. "Mrs. Hartwell," she called out before Ellie could even approach, "I hope you're not coming to ask for credit. Mr. Pike was very clear about our policy regarding abandoned women." Several townspeople had stopped to watch the confrontation. Ellie felt their eyes like physical weight, but forced herself to walk forward with dignity. "I have cash money, Mrs. Pike. I simply need basic provisions." Augusta's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Cash money? Well, that changes things slightly." She stepped aside to let them enter, but followed closely as if expecting them to steal. "Though I should warn you, our prices have gone up. Winter shortage, you understand." The store's interior was dim and cramped, shelves stocked with goods that seemed to mock Ellie's meager resources. Barrels of flour and sugar stood next to racks of rifles and traps. Bolts of fabric shared space with mining equipment and patent medicines. The smell of pickle brine and tobacco mixed with leather and kerosene. "How much for 20 pounds of flour?" Ellie asked, already dreading the answer. $1.50, Augusta replied promptly. "Sugar's $2 a pound, salt pork $3. In dollars, and don't even ask about coffee or tea." Ellie's heart sank. Her $2 silver wouldn't buy enough to last a week, let alone see them through winter. "Those prices are double what they were last month." "Supply and demand," Augusta said with a shrug that suggested she was enjoying this. "Of course, if you had a man to hunt and trap for you, you wouldn't need to buy so much food." Grace tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered urgently. Ellie bent to listen, then straightened with forced calm. "We'll take 5 pounds of flour and a pound of salt, that's all." As Augusta measured out the meager supplies, she kept up a running commentary, designed for the other customers who'd filtered into the store. "Such a shame when women don't keep their men happy at home. Creates such difficulties for everyone. Why, just yesterday I was telling Mr. Pike." "That's enough," Thomas said loudly, stepping between his mother and the storekeeper. "We don't need your lectures along with your overpriced flour." Augusta's face flushed with anger. "Well, I see the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Rudeness must run in the family." She slapped the small sack of flour on the counter. "That'll be $1 exactly, and I'll thank you not to return until you can teach your children proper manners." Ellie placed her silver dollar on the counter with careful precision, gathered her purchases, and shepherded her children toward the door. As they left, she heard Augusta's voice following them. "Pride goeth before a fall, Eleanor Hartwell. You do well to remember that." Outside, the autumn air felt clean after the store's oppressive atmosphere. But their situation had worsened rather than improved. $1 remaining, minimal supplies, and now they were effectively banned from the general store. "Mama," Grace said quietly, "what are we going to do?" Before Ellie could answer, a shadow fell across them. Sheriff Wade Garrett stood there, his badge glinting in the weak sunlight. He was a tall man with kind eyes but a weak chin, the sort who enforced laws selectively based on social pressure. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, removing his hat, "might I have a word?" Eleanor sent the children a few steps away and faced the sheriff. "If this is about Robert, I don't know where he's gone." "California," he said, "but men say lots of things." "It's not about Robert," Garrett replied, looking uncomfortable. "It's about you and the children. There's been some talk in town about your situation. Some folks are concerned about children living alone with their mother so far from town, especially with winter coming." A chill ran down Ellie's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "What exactly are these folks suggesting?" The sheriff shifted his weight, avoiding her eyes. "Well, there's the county poor farm over in Salem. They take in orphans and unfortunate women. Teach them trades, give them proper guidance. My children are not orphans," Ellie said firmly, "and I am not an unfortunate woman. I am a mother providing for her family." "Be that as it may," Garrett continued, "the town council has authority to investigate situations where children might be at risk. If you can't demonstrate the ability to provide adequate food and shelter through the winter..." He didn't finish, but the threat was clear. The county could take her children, separate them, parcel them out to strangers who would use them for labor while claiming Christian charity. "How long do I have?" Ellie asked, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. Mayor Briggs suggested a month. "If you haven't shown significant improvement in your circumstances by then..." He shrugged apologetically. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hartwell, if it were up to me. But the mayor's got the town council behind him on this." As the sheriff walked away, Ellie stood frozen on the wooden sidewalk. A month. 30 days to learn skills that took years to master, to somehow fill a larder without money or credit, to prove herself capable of what everyone believed. Impossible. Thomas ran back to her side, his young face creased with worry. "What did he want, Mama?" She looked down at her son, seeing Robert's features, but hoping for a different character within. "He wants us to prove we can survive," she said simply. "So that's what we're going to do." As they began the long walk home, Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities, each more desperate than the last. She could sell their furniture, but Robert had broken most of it. She could offer to take in washing, but few in Willow Creek could afford such services. She could try to hunt with their ancient fowling piece, but she'd never shot anything larger than a garden pest. The forest seemed to close in around them as they walked, dark and impenetrable. Somewhere in those woods were deer, elk, rabbits, and grouse, all the food they needed to survive. But might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did her. As they rounded a bend in the trail, Thomas suddenly stopped and pointed ahead. A figure emerged from the forest, tall and broad-shouldered, carrying what looked like several beaver pelts over his shoulder. The man moved with the fluid grace of someone completely at home in the wilderness, his buckskin jacket and fur cap marking him as one of the independent trappers who worked the high country. He noticed them and paused, touching the brim of his cap politely. "Ma'am," he said in a voice graveled by years of solitude. "Young ones." Ellie nodded in return, but before she could speak, the stranger's attention fixed on something beyond them. His eyes narrowed, and in one smooth motion, he set down his pelts and unslung the rifle from his shoulder. "Everyone stay very still," he said quietly. Eleanor's blood froze. She pulled her children close, turning slowly to see what had captured the trapper's attention. There, not 20 yards behind them on the trail they'd just traveled, stood a massive grizzly bear. The creature rose on its hind legs, testing the air with its black nose, its small eyes fixed on their group. "When I say run," the trapper said, calmly, sighting down his rifle, "you head for that big oak tree to your right. Don't stop, don't look back. Understood?" Ellie could barely nod, terror having stolen her voice. The bear dropped to all fours and took a step forward, its intentions unclear but its presence menacing. "Run!" the trapper commanded. Eleanor grabbed Mary and pushed the older children. Ahead of her, racing for the oak tree, behind them the rifle cracked like thunder. They reached the tree and scrambled to its far side, Ellie's heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. A second shot rang out, followed by a terrible roar that seemed to shake the very ground, then silence. After several endless moments, the trapper's voice called out, "It's safe now. You can come out." They emerged from behind the oak to find the massive bear lying still on the trail. The trapper stood over it, reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency. Up close, Ellie could see he was older than she'd first thought, perhaps 50, with silver threading through his dark beard and deep lines carved around grey eyes that missed nothing. "That," he said, turning to them, "was a close thing. Bears. Been following you for the last half-mile. Probably smelled the flour you're carrying. This late in the season, they get desperate to pack on weight." Thomas stared at the dead bear with a mixture of awe and shock. "You saved our lives." The trapper shrugged. "Just happened to be passing through." He studied them more carefully. Now, taking in their worn clothes, Ellie's city-bred appearance, and the small sack of provisions, his expression shifted to something unreadable. "Heading to the Hartwell place in Bear Hollow." "How did you know?" Ellie asked, finding her voice at last. "Not many folks live out that way. Heard talk in town about Robert Hartwell leaving his family. Didn't put much stock in it until now." His grey eyes held no judgment, only assessment. "Name's Jasper. Blackwood. I trap the high country, but winter's pushing me down to lower elevations." "Eleanor Hartwell," she replied, then introduced each of her children. "We owe you our lives, Mr. Blackwood. I don't know how to repay such a debt." Jasper was quiet for a moment, studying the bear. "Might be we can help each other," he said. "Finally, this bear's got enough meat to feed a family for weeks, if properly preserved. Problem is, I can't carry it all, and it'll spoil before I can get it to my cache." He looked directly at Eleanor. "I could teach you how to process it, smoke the meat for winter storage. In exchange, we split the meat even, and I get a place to stay tonight before heading back to the mountains." Hope flared in Ellie's chest. "For the first time in days. You teach us, but we have nothing to offer except shelter." "Sometimes shelter's enough," Jasper replied. He glanced at the darkening sky. "Storm coming tonight. These old bones prefer a roof to a lean-to when the weather turns." He began pulling rope from his pack. "Besides, anyone living this far from town needs to know how to handle themselves in the woods. Appears nobody taught you proper." And as Jasper showed Thomas how to rig a travois to drag the bear, Eleanor felt a shift in the air beyond the approaching storm. This strange, solitary man had appeared at their darkest moment, like something out of her children's fairy tales. But there was nothing magical about his offer, just practical frontier wisdom and an exchange of needs. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, as they prepared to move the massive carcass, "why would you help us? You don't know us, and the town clearly has opinions about abandoned women." Jasper secured the last knot and stood, his weathered face thoughtful. "Towns have lots of opinions. Woods don't care about opinions, just competence." He shouldered his rifle. "Your young ones there showed courage when that bear appeared. Didn't panic, followed instructions. That tells me something about how they were raised." He began pulling the travois, Thomas eagerly helping while Grace walked alongside asking endless questions about bears and hunting. As they made their way toward Bear Hollow, Eleanor realized this was the first time since Robert's departure that she didn't feel entirely alone. The stranger had offered more than just shared meat or a night's shelter. He'd offered knowledge, the one currency that might actually save them from starvation and separation. As thunder rumbled overhead and the first drops of rain began to fall, Eleanor Hartwell allowed herself to believe they might survive after all. The cabin appeared through the trees just as the storm broke in earnest. Rain hammered the roof while they worked together to hang the bear in the small barn, safe from scavengers. As Jasper began the careful process of skinning and butchering, explaining each step to the fascinated children, Eleanor watched from the doorway. Her hands were soft, her knowledge limited, her resources nearly gone, but she had something now that she'd lacked that morning, a teacher willing to share the skills she desperately needed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and the town's ultimatum still hung over them like a sword. But tonight, with the storm raging outside and the promise of learning within, she felt the first stirring of genuine hope. Sometimes salvation came in unexpected forms. Tonight it wore buckskin and carried the wisdom of the wilderness. As Eleanor turned back to the cabin to prepare their first real meal in days, she made a silent vow. She would learn everything. This man could teach. She would master every skill, face every challenge, transform herself from abandoned city woman to capable frontier mother. The town might have given her a month to prove herself. But Eleanor Hartwell had just been given something far more valuable, the tools to exceed their narrow expectations and secure her family's future, one hard-earned lesson at a time. Steam rose from the pot of bear stew as Eleanor ladled portions into the wooden bowls she'd salvaged from Robert's destruction. The cabin glowed with warmth from the fire, a stark contrast to the cold rain hammering against the windows. Jasper Blackwood sat at their rough table, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of chicory coffee, watching as the children devoured their first substantial meal in days. "Slow down there, young'un," he said gently to Samuel, who was wolfing down his stew. "That meat's rich. Your stomach's not used to it after living lean." Eleanor took her place at the table, marveling at how quickly this stranger had transformed their fortunes. The bear meat, properly prepared and seasoned with wild herbs Jasper had identified in their yard, tasted better than anything she'd cooked in months. More importantly, dozens of strips now hung in the barn, slowly smoking over a bed of carefully tended coals. "Mr. Blackwood," Thomas said between bites, "how did you know that bear was following us? I never heard anything." Jasper leaned back, his grey eyes thoughtful. "Wasn't about hearing, son. Woods talk in different ways. Birds going quiet, squirrels chattering warnings, the way the deer trails crossed yours but veered off sudden-like. Bear sign was all around, if you knew how to read it." Grace set down her spoon, eyes wide with curiosity. "Could you teach us to read the woods?" "That's not something learned in a day," Jasper replied. "Takes seasons, years even, but..." He glanced at Eleanor, seeming to weigh something in his mind. "Basics might be managed if your mother's willing." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to be frank with you. The town has given us 1 month to prove we can survive the winter alone. If we fail, they'll take my children to the county poor farm. I'll learn anything, do anything to prevent that." Thunder crashed overhead, punctuating her words. Jasper was quiet for a long moment, studying the family before him. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decision. "I've got pelts cached throughout these mountains that need collecting before snow closes the high passes. Was planning to do it alone, like always. But with winter coming early and that grizzly out of hibernation already." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Might be I could use some help, and might be you could use some teaching." Hope flared in Eleanor's chest. "What are you proposing?" "I stay on for a spell, teach you and the young ones what you need to know. In exchange, you help me bring in my caches, provide meals and shelter while I'm training you. Fair trade. All around. Thomas nearly jumped from his chair. You teach us to hunt and trap? Really? If your mother agrees, Jasper said, but his attention remained on Eleanor. Won't be easy, Mom. Mountain life's hard on everyone, harder still on those not raised to it, and I'm not what you'd call sociable, set in my ways, used to solitude. Eleanor considered his words. Taking in a strange man, even temporarily, would add fuel to the town's gossip, but gossip couldn't feed her children or keep them warm through winter. What about your own preparations for winter? Don't you have a cabin to ready? A shadow crossed Jasper's face. Been living rough for 15 years. Winter camps, caves, lean-tos, had a proper cabin once, but he shrugged. That's long past. These days, I winter wherever the trapping's good. Little Mary, who'd been silent through dinner, suddenly spoke up. You could winter here, she said with 4-year-old directness. Mama makes good biscuits when we have flour. The adults exchanged glances over her head. Jasper's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. That's so, little miss. Well, biscuits are a powerful temptation. Eleanor made her decision. Mr. Blackwood, if you're willing to teach us, we're eager to learn. You're welcome to stay as long as needed. Then we have an agreement. He stood, moving to the window where rain streaked the glass. Storm'll break by morning. We'll start. With basics, firecraft, shelter building, reading sign. Young Tom there can help me check my trap lines, learn the routes. The girls need to know plant identification, food preservation, basic remedies. And me? Eleanor asked. Jasper turned. From the window. You need to learn it all, Mom. Hunting, tracking, weapon handling, wilderness navigation. There's not much time to make a mountain woman out of a city teacher, but we'll do what we can. That night, after the children were asleep, Eleanor found Jasper on the porch, smoking a pipe and watching the storm clear. Stars emerged between racing clouds, and the air smelled of pine and wet earth. I need to ask you something, she said, pulling her shawl tighter against the chill. Why are you really doing this? You could have taken your share of the bear and moved on. Jasper was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was distant, lost in memory. Had a family once. Wife, 2 boys, built a cabin not unlike this one up on Thunder Ridge. Came back from a week on the trap lines to find scarlet fever had taken them all. He drew on his pipe, the ember glowing in the darkness. That was 15 years ago. Been alone in these mountains ever since. Eleanor felt the weight of his loss, understanding now the sadness that lingered in his eyes. I'm sorry. Long time passed, he said. But watching you today, seeing how you held those children together when that bear showed up, reminded me of my Sarah. She had that same steel underneath the softness. He knocked his pipe against the railing, scattering embers. Seems wrong to let another family fail when I've got knowledge that might save them. They stood in companionable silence, watching the last clouds scud across the star-filled sky. Finally, Jasper stirred. Best get some sleep, Mom. Tomorrow we start turning you into something the town won't expect. Eleanor smiled in the darkness. And what's that? Dangerous, he replied simply, and went inside. The next morning dawned crystal clear, the world washed clean by the storm. Eleanor woke before sunrise to find Jasper already up, tending the smoking fire in the barn. The bear hide was stretched on a frame he'd built from saplings, and the meat strips had taken on a dark, glossy appearance. First lesson, he said when she joined him, fire's the difference between life and death out here. Not just for warmth, but for cooking, signaling, preserving food, keeping predators at bay. He handed her a piece of flint and a striker. Show me how you'd start a fire. Eleanor fumbled with the tools, producing a few weak sparks that died immediately. After several frustrating attempts, Jasper took the implements from her hands. "Watch," he said. "It's not about force, it's about angle and preparation." He gathered a small bundle of dry grass and shredded bark, forming a nest. With practiced ease, he struck sparks that caught in the tinder, then gently blew the ember to life. Within moments, small flames licked at twigs he'd arranged in a precise structure. "Fire needs three things," he explained as Eleanor tried again. "Fuel, air, and heat. Deny it anyone and it dies. Your job is to provide all three in proper measure." This time, Eleanor's sparks caught. She nursed the tiny ember carefully, remembering his technique, until flames rewarded her patience. The simple achievement filled her with pride entirely out of proportion to the act itself. "Good," Jasper said. "Now do it again, and again. Practice, until your hands know the motion without your mind directing them. In a blizzard or when you're hurt, thinking's a luxury you might not have." As the sun climbed higher, the children emerged from the cabin. Jasper set them all to different tasks. Thomas accompanied him to check a series of snares Jasper had set the previous evening, learning to read animal trails and understand feeding patterns. Grace and Samuel were tasked with gathering specific plants: yarrow for wounds, willow bark for fever, elderberries for winter medicine. Eleanor watched it all while practicing fire starting until her hands were sore. When she'd successfully lit 20 fires in a row, Jasper returned with Thomas, who carried 3 rabbits with obvious pride. "Now for something harder," Jasper announced. He led Eleanor to a fallen log and positioned her behind it, then handed her Robert's old fowling piece. "Ever shoot before?" "Once or twice," she admitted. "Robert said ladies shouldn't handle firearms. It wasn't seemly." Jasper snorted. "Seemly doesn't fill stomachs or stop bears. Here." He showed her how to load the weapon properly, how to seat the ball and patch, measure powder precisely. "This old smoothbore won't win any accuracy contests, but it'll do for close work." He set up targets, pine cones at various distances, and demonstrated proper stance and sighting. "Don't jerk the trigger, squeeze it gentle-like. Let the shot surprise you." Eleanor's first attempt went wide, the recoil startling her. The second was better. By the 10th shot, she was consistently hitting targets at 20 yards. "Natural aptitude," Jasper observed. "Some folk have it, most don't. You've got steady hands and good eyes. With practice, you'll be a fair shot." The compliment warmed her more than she cared to admit. When had Robert last praised any skill of hers? Days passed in this manner, each one packed with learning. Jasper was a patient but demanding teacher, never accepting good enough when better was possible. He taught Thomas to set snares and deadfalls, showed Grace how to identify edible mushrooms from deadly lookalikes, helped Samuel learn to move silently through the forest. For Eleanor, the lessons were most intensive. She learned to skin and butcher game, to read weather signs in cloud formations and wind patterns, to navigate by stars and sun. Her soft hands developed calluses from knife work and trap setting. Her city-bred sensibilities gave way to frontier pragmatism. One afternoon, while the children were gathering firewood, Jasper taught Eleanor to track. They moved through the forest slowly, Jasper pointing out signs invisible to her untrained. "Hey, see here?" He knelt by a muddy depression. "Deer track but old. Edges have crumbled, rains pooled in it. 2, maybe 3 days." He moved forward. "But this," he indicated a fresher print. "Made this morning. Young buck, favoring his left rear leg slightly. See how the print's deeper on one side." Eleanor studied the marks, beginning to see patterns she'd never noticed. "He's heading toward the creek." "Good. Why?" She thought about it. "Water, obviously, but also the maple saplings there. Deer like the tender bark, don't they?" Jasper's rare smile appeared. Now you're thinking like a hunter. Knowing where an animal's going is more important than where it's been. They followed the trail to a small clearing where, sure enough, fresh teeth marks scored several young maples. Jasper pointed to a natural blind created by fallen logs. Buck'll be back near sunset. Wind comes from the east in the evening, so we'd set up there. He indicated a spot downwind. Are we going to hunt him? Eleanor asked. Not today. Let him grow another year. But remember this spot. Come November, you might need that meat. As they walked back, Eleanor felt a shift in her perception. The forest was no longer an impenetrable wall of green, but a readable landscape full of signs and stories. Every broken twig, every disturbed leaf told her something about the life moving through these woods. Mr. Blackwood, she said suddenly, I've been meaning to ask. The town mentioned other trappers and hunters. Why haven't any of them offered to help us? His expression darkened. Most trappers work for the Hudson Bay Company or American Fur. They've got quotas to meet, territories to protect. Independent trappers like me are rare these days. He paused. And those that might help, well, they've learned to steer clear of complications. Complications. Town politics, moral judgments. Men who help abandoned women get talked about, accused of improper interests, easier to mind their own business. Eleanor felt a flash of anger. But you're helping us. I stopped caring what towns think a long time ago, Jasper said quietly. Besides, I'm old enough to be your father. Let them gossip if they want. That evening, as Eleanor prepared supper from the rabbits Thomas had snared, a knock came at the door. Sheriff Garrett stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. Evening, Mrs. Hartwell. I heard you had a visitor staying here. Eleanor kept her voice level. Mr. Blackwood is teaching us wilderness skills in exchange for room and board. I believe that's still legal in Oregon Territory. Of course. The sheriff peered past her, noting Jasper's presence by the fire. It's just that some folks in town are concerned. A strange man living with a widow and her children. Those same folks who refused us charity or fair prices. Eleanor's voice sharpened. Where was their concern when we faced starvation? Garrett shifted uncomfortably. Now, Mrs. Hartwell, no need to be hostile. I'm just checking on the situation, making sure everything's proper. Jasper rose from his chair and moved to stand behind Eleanor. His presence was steady, solid, unthreatening but unmistakably protective. Sheriff, he said in his gravelly voice, I've trapped these mountains for 20 years. Never had my character questioned until I started helping a family in need. Makes a man wonder about a town's priorities. The sheriff's face reddened. No one's questioning anything, Mr. Blackwood, just doing my job. Your job, Eleanor said coolly, is to protect citizens from harm. We were abandoned, left to starve, and the town turned its back. Now that we're learning to survive without their help, suddenly there's concern about propriety. Garrett had no answer for that. He settled his hat back on his head and backed toward the porch steps. Just wanted to make sure all was well. I'll be going now. After he left, Eleanor stood at the door, shaking with delayed anger. Jasper placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. That took courage, he said, but now the town knows I'm here. Gossip will spread. Might make things harder for you. Eleanor turned to face him. Let them talk. I'd rather be condemned for accepting help than praised for accepting starvation. A week into their arrangement, Jasper announced it was time to retrieve his first cache. He'd established several throughout the mountains, storing pelts and supplies in hidden locations safe from weather and thieves. It's a 2-day journey, he explained over breakfast, up to Cedar Falls, then along the rim to Cave Creek. Trails rough but manageable if we move steady. We, Eleanor asked, you and young Tom. Others can hold the homestead. This is a test, Mrs. Hartwell. You need to prove you can handle yourself in rough country. Eleanor felt a flutter of anxiety. 2 days in the wilderness, away from the cabin's safety. But she saw the necessity. If something happened to Jasper, she needed to know these trails, these caches. When do we leave? First light tomorrow. Pack light, blanket roll, ammunition, dried meat, water. I'll handle the rest. That night, Eleanor prepared carefully, following Jasper's instructions exactly. Thomas was so excited he could barely sleep, but Eleanor lay awake for different reasons. The wilderness still frightened her, its vastness and indifference, a stark contrast to the ordered world she'd known. But fear, she was learning, could be a teacher too. They left before dawn, the stars still bright overhead. Jasper led them along trails Eleanor had never noticed, paths that seemed to materialize from the forest itself. Thomas walked between them, rifle over his shoulder, trying to match Jasper's silent tread. The first day tested Eleanor's newfound stamina. They climbed steadily through dense pine forests, crossed swift streams on slippery logs, navigated boulder fields that threatened to turn ankles. Jasper set a steady pace, not fast but relentless, stopping only to point out landmarks or teaching moments. See that lightning-struck pine? He indicated a towering dead tree, visible for miles. If you're ever lost, find high ground. Look for markers like that, nature's signposts. By evening, Eleanor's legs burned and her pack felt twice its morning weight. But she'd kept pace, hadn't complained, hadn't asked for extra rest. When Jasper called a halt at a sheltered grove near a spring, she felt a surge of pride at the approving nod he gave her. Camp was a simple affair. A lean-to of pine boughs, a small fire, blankets on beds of gathered fur. Eleanor watched Jasper's economy of motion, how he accomplished much with little effort, every action purposeful. "Tom," he said, as darkness fell, "first watch is yours. Wake me at midnight." He handed the boy his pocket watch. "Remember what I taught you. Listen with your whole body, not just your ears." Thomas swelled with importance, taking position on a log facing the forest. Eleanor started to protest. He was only 11, but caught Jasper's slight head shake. "Boy needs responsibility," he said quietly as they settled by the fire. "Needs to know he's trusted. He'll do fine." They sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them. After a while, Eleanor spoke. "Can I ask you something personal?" Jasper nodded. "You said you had a wife and children. What were their names?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Sarah. She was a school teacher too, back in Missouri. Boys were James and little Ben." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Ben wasn't so little, 10 pounds at birth. Nearly killed Sarah, bringing him into the world. How did you meet her?" "Her father hired me to guide their wagon train west. She was 18, full of ideas about women's suffrage and education reform. Argued with me the whole journey about everything from Indian policy to proper grammar." His voice softened with memory. "By Oregon, I was sunk. Couldn't imagine life without her setting me straight on something." Eleanor smiled. "She sounds formidable." She was. Strong-willed, clever, beautiful in that way that grows on you rather than striking you all at once. Took her a year to accept my proposal. Said she needed to be sure I could handle a wife with opinions. They lapsed into silence again. The fire burned low, stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance an owl called. Eleanor felt the strange intimacy of the wilderness night, how it stripped away pretense and social barriers. "Your turn," Jasper said suddenly. "What made a Boston lady marry a dreamer like Robert Hartwell?" Eleanor considered the question. "He was charming, handsome, full of grand plans and beautiful words. My father had died, left debts that consumed. Everything. I was 23, teaching at a school that paid barely enough for room and board. Robert promised adventure, prosperity, a life of meaning in the West. She poked at the fire with a stick. I mistook words for substance, dreams for plans. We all make that mistake when we're young, Jasper said gently. Question is what we do after we learn better. At midnight, Thomas woke Jasper for watch change. The boy had stayed alert, reporting the movements of deer, the hunting call of a fox, the rustle of small prey in the underbrush. Jasper clapped him on the shoulder. "Well done, son. You've got the makings of a woodsman." Thomas beamed as he rolled into his blankets. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into sleep. Eleanor should have slept too, but the night's strange energy kept her wakeful. "Can't sleep?" Jasper asked from his watch position. "Too much to think about," she admitted. "First time in the deep woods does that. Everything seems bigger, more immediate. City walls keep the world at bay. Out here, you're part of it all, whether you like it or not." Eleanor rose and joined him on the log. "I used to think the forest was frightening, all those unknown sounds, hidden dangers." "Still is frightening," Jasper said. "But fear's just another tool if you use it right. Keeps you alert, careful. It's when you stop being afraid that you get careless, and careless gets you dead out here." They sat together through the depths of night, talking little but sharing the profound silence of the wilderness. When dawn began to gray the eastern sky, Eleanor felt she understood something fundamental about this man who'd entered their lives so unexpectedly. His solitude wasn't rejection of humanity, but rather a deep communion with something larger, older, more essential. The second day brought them to Cedar Falls by noon. The waterfall cascaded down a 100-foot cliff, mist rising like smoke in the sunlight. Behind the falling water, barely visible, was the dark mouth of a cave. "Cash is in there," Jasper explained. "Natural cold storage, dry, bear-proof if you do it right." He showed them a hidden rope ladder secured to the cliff face. "Tom, you're lightest. Want to try?" The boy's eyes widened with excitement and fear. "What if I fall?" "Then you'll learn to climb better next time," Jasper said matter-of-factly. "But you won't fall. Trust your hands and feet, not your eyes. Feel for each hold." Eleanor's heart clenched as Thomas began the climb, but she held her tongue. This too was necessary. Her children needed confidence as much as skills. Jasper stood ready to guide or catch if needed, but Thomas managed the climb alone, disappearing behind the waterfall with a whoop of triumph. "Your turn," Jasper said to Eleanor. The climb was harder than it looked. Spray from the falls made handholds slick, and the rope ladder swayed alarmingly. Halfway up, Eleanor froze, suddenly aware of the drop below. "Don't look down," Jasper called. "Feel the rock, trust the rope. You're stronger than you know." Eleanor forced herself to continue, one rung at a time. When she finally pulled herself into the cave mouth, soaked and trembling, she felt she'd conquered more than just a cliff. The cache was impressive. Dozens of pelts bundled in oilcloth, bags of pemmican and dried meat, spare traps and tools. Everything a man might need to survive an unexpected winter or recover from disaster. "Why so much?" Eleanor asked as they lowered bundles on ropes. "Insurance," Jasper replied. "Lost everything once to fire, another time flood. Man learns to spread his resources. Never keep all your eggs in one basket, even if the basket seems safe." They made camp near the falls that night, feasting on cached pemmican and fresh trout Jasper caught with effortless skill. Thomas could barely contain his excitement about the climb, the cave, the adventure of it all. "Ma, did you see how high that was? And behind the water, there's this whole other chamber that goes back into the mountain. Mr. Blackwood says Indians used to winter there sometimes." Eleanor smiled at her son's enthusiasm, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Watching Jasper these past days, she'd seen a man completely at home in a world that had terrified her. more than his skills. She admired his calm acceptance of whatever came, weather, danger, hardship. He didn't fight the wilderness. He flowed with it, reading its moods and working within its rhythms. The journey back took a different route, Jasper showing them alternate paths and emergency shelters. By the time they spotted their cabin through the trees, Eleanor felt changed in ways she couldn't quite articulate. The forest was still vast and potentially dangerous, but it no longer felt entirely alien. She was beginning to see it as Jasper did, not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a teacher to be respected. Back home, Grace and Samuel rushed to greet them, full of stories about their own adventures. They'd successfully preserved a dozen rabbits Thomas had snared before leaving, gathered a bushel of late berries, and even faced down a curious black bear that had approached the cabin. "Grace remembered what you taught us," Samuel reported proudly. "Made lots of noise, threw rocks, didn't run. The bear just huffed and wandered off." Eleanor hugged her children, proud of their courage and growing competence. Over supper, she watched her family interact with Jasper, saw how naturally he'd fitted into their lives. Thomas hung on his every word. The girls pestered him with questions about plants and animals. Even little Mary had overcome her initial shyness to climb onto his lap during story time. Later, as Eleanor tucked Mary into bed, the child asked, sleepily, "Is Mr. Jasper our new papa?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. "No, sweetheart, he's our teacher and friend." "Oh." Mary seemed to consider this. "Could he be our papa? He's nice and he knows everything about the woods." Eleanor smoothed her daughter's hair. "Sleep now, little one. We'll see what tomorrow brings." But as she left the children's room, the question lingered. What place did Jasper Blackwood have in their lives beyond teacher and temporary help? And more troubling, what would happen when he'd taught them all he could? Mountain men were notorious for their restless spirits. How long? Before the call of the high country pulled him away. Outside, she found Jasper on the porch, pipe in hand as usual. He'd taken to spending evenings there, watching the stars appear and listening to the night sounds. Eleanor joined him, pulling her shawl close against the autumn chill. "Successful. Drip," he said without preamble. "You did well, better than most greenhorns I've guided." "I had a good teacher," Eleanor replied, "though I suspect you went easy on us. That wasn't your most difficult cachet, was it?" A slight smile creased his weathered face. "Might have chosen a starter route. Next one's harder, 2 days each. Way high altitude, early snow possible, but you'll be ready by then." Eleanor studied his profile in the dim light. "How long will you stay, Mr. Blackwood? Teaching us, I mean." He was quiet for a long moment. "Long as it takes, I suppose. Long as you need teaching and I have knowledge to share." "And after that?" He turned to look at her directly. "That's a bridge we'll cross when we reach it, Mrs. Hartwell. For now, let's focus on getting you through that town inspection. 2 weeks left, and there's still much to learn." Eleanor nodded, accepting the deflection. But as they sat in comfortable silence, she wondered if either of them really believed this arrangement was as temporary as they pretended. Something had shifted during their journey to Cedar Falls. Some unspoken understanding reached. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, she'd face the town council's judgment. But win or lose that battle, Eleanor suspected her life had already changed in ways that couldn't be undone. The wilderness had marked her, claimed her in some indefinable way. And the man beside her, teacher and protector, had become part of that claiming. The future remained uncertain, fraught with challenges she could barely imagine. But for the first time since Robert's betrayal, Eleanor faced that uncertainty without fear. She had skills now, growing daily. She had knowledge, hard-won and practical. Most importantly, she had glimpsed a strength within herself she'd never suspected existed. Whatever came next, she would meet it as herself, not as Robert's abandoned wife or the town's object of pity, but as Eleanor Hartwell, a woman learning. to read the wilderness and finding herself written in its vast pages. Morning frost crunched under Eleanor's boots as she made her way to the small meadow behind their cabin. The sun hadn't yet crested the eastern ridge, but she'd grown accustomed to rising before dawn. In her hands, she carried the Hawken rifle. Jasper had cleaned and restored from Robert's abandoned collection, its weight now familiar after countless hours of practice. 3 weeks had passed since Jasper Blackwood entered their lives, and the transformation in the Hartwell family was remarkable. Eleanor paused at the meadow's edge, remembering how she'd trembled holding this very rifle that first week, flinching at every shot. Now she moved with quiet confidence, setting up the targets Jasper had prepared, various sized circles cut from bark, hanging from branches at different distances. "Remember," Jasper's voice came from behind her, though she hadn't heard his. "Approach. Breathing is everything. Let your heartbeat settle between shots." Eleanor nodded, shouldering the rifle and sighting down the barrel. The closest target hung at 50 yards, the farthest at 150. She'd progressed from barely hitting the broad side of a barn to consistently grouping shots within a hand's span at moderate range. The rifle cracked, sending the nearest target spinning. Without lowering the weapon, Eleanor worked the lever action, ejected the spent cartridge, and shifted to the next target. 5 shots, 5 hits, each one deliberate and controlled. "Better," Jasper said, examining the targets. "Your grouping's tighter, but you're still anticipating the recoil on the long shots. See here?" He pointed to the furthest target where her shot had struck low and left. "You're dropping your shoulder just before the trigger breaks." Eleanor studied the evidence of her error. "I thought I'd corrected that. Habits take time to break. Here." He stood behind her, adjusting her stance with gentle touches to her elbow and shoulder. "Feel the difference. Lock that shoulder forward. Let the rifle push straight back into the pocket." The contact was brief, instructional, but Eleanor felt a flutter of something else. An awareness of his presence that had grown stronger these past days. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the mechanics of the shot. This time, the bullet struck dead center at 150 yards. "Perfect," Jasper said, stepping back. "You're ready for moving targets. Tom's setting up the swing ropes near the creek. We'll work on leading shots, judging distance on the fly." As they walked back toward the cabin, Eleanor noticed Jasper, favoring his left leg slightly. "Your old wound bothering you?" He glanced at her, surprised by her observation. "Cold mornings make it stiff. Nothing significant." Grace has been making willow bark tea. She's quite proud of her medicine stock. Your daughter's got healing hands," Jasper agreed. "Natural instinct for which plants help and which harm. Not many have that gift." They found the children already at work on their morning tasks. Thomas was splitting firewood with newfound efficiency, each swing of the axe precise and powerful. Grace tended the smokehouse, where strips of venison and rabbit hung in neat rows. Samuel had taken naturally to tracking, spending hours following game trails and reporting his findings to Jasper each evening. Even little Mary contributed, gathering, kindling and feeding the chickens with careful attention to Jasper's instructions about watching for predator signs. "Mr. Blackwood," Samuel ran up, his face flushed with excitement. "I found it! The den you told me to look for. 3 sets of tracks going in, different sizes. Fox family, just like you said." Jasper knelt to examine the rough map Samuel had drawn in the dirt. "Good work. Now, why would foxes choose that particular spot for a den?" Samuel thought carefully. "It's on the south slope, so it gets morning sun. The brambles hide the entrance, and there's that rock outcrop above for the adults to watch from." "Exactly right. Understanding why animals choose their homes tells you where to find them. Remember that." Eleanor watched the interaction with quiet satisfaction. Her children were learning more than survival skills. They were developing confidence, independence, a deep connection to the land around them. The sullen fear that had marked their first days after Robert's departure had given way to eager curiosity. "Ma," Thomas called, setting aside the axe. "Mr. Blackwood says I'm ready to help check the high trap line. Can I go?" "That's a 3-day circuit," Eleanor said, looking to Jasper for confirmation. Boy's proven himself on the shorter routes. Time he learned the full territory. Jasper's grey eyes met hers. Weather's holding fair. Good opportunity. Eleanor hesitated, maternal worry warring with the knowledge that Thomas needed these challenges. At 11, he was old enough to take on greater responsibilities, especially under Jasper's watchful guidance. "Very well," she agreed. "But you follow Mr. Blackwood's instructions exactly. No wandering off, no unnecessary risks." Thomas's face lit up. "I promise, Ma. I'll make you proud." As the men prepared for their journey, Eleanor found herself organizing the household with new authority. 3 weeks of intensive training had changed more than just her practical skills. She moved with purpose now, each action efficient and considered. When Grace asked about preserving the late-season herbs, Eleanor guided her through the process with confidence born of experience. "See how the leaves are just starting to brown at the edges?" she showed her daughter. "That means the essential oils are at their peak. We'll dry these stems together, but the roots need different treatment." The morning passed in productive work. Eleanor and Grace processed herbs, while Samuel practiced his letters, using a stick to write in the smooth dirt near the porch. Mary helped where she could, her small hands sorting leaves with careful concentration. "Mama," she piped up suddenly, "why doesn't Mr. Jasper have a house of his own?" Eleanor paused in her work. It was a question she'd wondered about herself. Jasper had mentioned trading posts where he sometimes wintered, caves and hidden camps throughout the mountains, but no permanent home. "Some people prefer to wander," she answered carefully. "Mr. Blackwood loves the mountains. They're his home in a way houses aren't." "But winter's coming," Mary persisted with 4-year-old logic. "Everyone needs a warm place when it snows." Before Eleanor could respond, bootsteps on the porch announced the men's departure. Jasper had equipped Thomas with a smaller pack and a reliable Spencer carbine. The boy stood straighter, older somehow, ready for his first real test. 3 days, Jasper reminded Eleanor. "We'll check the North Circuit, reset traps. Might take some game if we spot it. I'll keep him safe." "I know you will." Eleanor touched Thomas's shoulder. "Remember everything you've learned. Trust Mr. Blackwood, but trust yourself too." After they left, the cabin felt oddly empty despite the remaining children's presence. Eleanor found herself glancing toward the forest trail more often than necessary, already counting the hours until their return. That afternoon brought unexpected visitors. Sheriff Garrett arrived with Mayor Briggs and 2 members of the town council, Peterson the banker and Holbrook, who owned the sawmill. Their horses stopped at the edge of the cleared yard, and Eleanor met them on the porch, rifle prominently displayed against the wall. "Gentlemen," she said coolly, "to what do we owe this pleasure?" Mayor Briggs, a portly man with elaborate whiskers, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hartwell, we've come to conduct a preliminary assessment of your situation. The formal review is still a week away, but we thought it prudent to gauge your progress." Eleanor noted their surprised expressions as they took in the organized woodpile, the smoking shed with its rows of preserved meat, the garden plot already prepared for spring planting. This wasn't the scene of desperate poverty they'd expected. "Of course," she replied. "Please look around. You'll find everything in order." The men dismounted, Garrett helping the mayor, whose girth made mounting and dismounting a challenge. As they toured the property, Eleanor answered their questions with calm authority. Yes, they had sufficient firewood for winter. Yes, the meat stores would last until spring. Yes, the children were healthy and continuing their education. But Mrs. Hartwell, Peterson interjected, his thin face skeptical, surely you haven't accomplished all this alone. We've heard reports of a man staying here, some trapper. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Mr. Blackwood has been teaching us wilderness skills in exchange for room and board. I believe I mentioned this arrangement to Sheriff Garrett previously. Yes, but a strange man living with a widow, Holbrook began, then faltered under Eleanor's sharp look. Living here, temporarily while providing education my children desperately need, she corrected. Unless the town has changed its position on providing assistance, I'll continue to ensure my family's survival by whatever legal means necessary. Mayor Briggs harumphed, his florid face growing redder. Now see here, Mrs. Hartwell, no one questions your right to seek help, but there are proprieties to consider. What kind of example does this set? An example of resourcefulness and adaptation, Eleanor shot back. Qualities I believed were valued on the frontier. Or would you prefer I set an example of prideful starvation? The men exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for this confident, articulate woman, who bore little resemblance to the desperate widow they'd dismissed weeks ago. Where is this Mr. Blackwood now? Sheriff Garrett asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. Teaching my son the northern trap circuit. They'll return in 3 days. Eleanor gestured toward the forest. Thomas is learning skills that will make him a valuable member of this community. Isn't that what we all want? Capable, contributing citizens? The group moved to examine the root cellar, now stocked with preserved vegetables, wild tubers, and Eleanor's small remaining supply of flour. Grace appeared with cups of pine needle tea, serving the men with quiet dignity that impressed despite their prejudices. Your children seem different, Peterson observed, accepting the tea. More composed. Hard work and responsibility build character, Eleanor replied. They've discovered strengths they didn't know they possessed. As the inspection continued, Eleanor caught the men's exchanging meaningful looks. The evidence of her family's preparation was undeniable. More disturbing to their preconceptions was Eleanor herself, assured, knowledgeable, demonstrating skills they'd never expected from a former city school teacher. Well, Mayor Briggs said finally, settling his bulk back onto his horse with obvious effort. This is satisfactory for now. We'll conduct the formal review as scheduled. I look forward to it, Eleanor said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Perhaps by then you'll have reconsidered your policies regarding families in crisis. After all, if a widow with 4 children can achieve this much in 3 weeks, imagine what proper support might accomplish. The mayor's face purpled, but he merely nodded curtly and turned his horse toward town. The others followed, though Sheriff Garrett lingered a moment. You've surprised them, he said quietly. That's not easy to do, but be careful, Mrs. Hartwell. Proud men don't like being proven wrong. After they left, Eleanor found her hands shaking slightly. She'd maintained her composure throughout the inspection, but the strain of constant vigilance was wearing. Grace appeared at her side, slipping a small hand into hers. You did well, Mama. They didn't expect us to be so prepared. Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand. No, they didn't. But preparation is only part of it. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. That evening, as Eleanor tucked the younger children into bed, Samuel asked, "Will they really take us away if we fail the review?" Eleanor sat on the edge of his bed, considering her answer. "They'll try, but we won't fail, Sam. We've learned too much, come too far. Besides," she added with a small smile, "we have advantages they don't expect. Like Mr. Blackwood?" "Like ourselves," she corrected gently. "Mr. Blackwood taught us the skills, but we're the ones who learned them. Never forget that your strength comes from within." The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. Without Jasper and Thomas, Eleanor took on additional responsibilities, checking the nearby trap lines, maintaining the smoke fires, continuing the children's lessons in both academics and woodcraft. She discovered a rhythm to the work, a satisfaction in competence that she'd never experienced in her previous life. On the second evening, as purple dusk settled over the mountains, Eleanor sat by the fire cleaning the Hawken rifle. The action had become automatic, her hands moving with practiced precision. Grace worked beside her, fletching arrows under Eleanor's guidance, another skill Jasper had insisted they all learn. "Mama," Grace said thoughtfully, "do you think Papa ever regretted leaving us?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. They rarely spoke of Robert now, his betrayal overshadowed by their new reality. "I don't know, sweetheart. Perhaps. But regret doesn't change actions, and his actions showed his true character." "I don't miss him," Grace continued, her young face serious. "Is that wrong? I feel like I should miss him, but I don't. Life is better now, even though it's harder." Eleanor set down the rifle and drew her daughter close. "It's not wrong to feel relief when poison leaves your life. Your father chose his path. We've chosen ours." "Mr. Blackwood would never abandon us," Grace said with certainty. Eleanor's heart skipped. "Mr. Blackwood isn't ours to keep, Grace. He's a wanderer, a free spirit. When he's taught us all he can, he'll move on. We need to be prepared for that." But even as she spoke the words, Eleanor wondered if they were true. Something had grown between her and Jasper during these weeks. Not the desperate dependence she'd felt with Robert, but a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. When he looked at her now, she saw admiration for her growing skills, appreciation for her quick mind, and something else. Something neither of them had yet acknowledged. The third day dawned grey and cold, with the smell of snow in the air. Eleanor woke with an inexplicable anxiety, a tightness in her chest that wouldn't ease. She tried to focus on morning chores, but found herself constantly scanning the forest edge for movement. "They'll be back before dark," she told herself. But worry gnawed at her concentration. By midday, the first snowflakes began to fall, large, lazy flakes that drifted down like ash. Eleanor gathered the children inside, stoking the fire and preparing hot soup for the travelers' return. But as afternoon wore into evening and the snow thickened, her concern grew into genuine fear. "Mama, look!" Samuel called from the window. "Someone's coming!" Eleanor rushed to peer through the growing darkness. A single figure emerged from the swirling snow. Jasper, moving fast, alone. Her heart plummeted. She met him at the door, reading bad news in his grim expression before he spoke. "Thomas?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Safe," Jasper said quickly, "but injured. I left him sheltered in a cave about 5 miles up the mountain. Needs help getting back." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by fresh worry. "What happened?" "Rock slide on the high trail. Boy pushed me clear, took a glancing blow himself. Shoulders dislocated, possibly ribs cracked. He's tough, but the snow's getting worse. We need to bring him down tonight." Eleanor didn't hesitate. "Grace, you're in charge. Keep the fire going, watch the young ones. Samuel, help Mr. Blackwood prepare a travois. I'll get the medical supplies." "You'll do within minutes." Eleanor had packed bandages, willow bark tea, and the small bottle of laudanum she'd saved for emergencies. She dressed in her warmest clothes, strapped on the snowshoes Jasper had taught her to use, and shouldered a pack of supplies. "You sure about this?" Jasper asked as they prepared to leave. "Trail's rough in good weather, in snow." "He's my son," Eleanor said simply. "Let's go." They moved into the storm, Eleanor following in Jasper's tracks as snow swirled around them. The familiar forest transformed into an alien landscape of white and shadow. Wind howled through the pines, driving snow into their faces, making each step a struggle. For the first hour, Eleanor focused on simply maintaining pace. The snowshoes helped, but the drifts were already knee-deep in places, and the trail pitched steeply upward. Her breath came in harsh gasps, muscles burning with effort. "Here," Jasper called over the wind, stopping at a small shelter of overhanging rocks. "Rest a moment. Catch your breath." Eleanor gratefully accepted the brief respite, sipping water from the canteen Jasper offered. In the relative quiet of the shelter, she could hear the storm's full fury raging outside. "It's getting worse," she observed. "Mountain storms come fast," Jasper agreed. "But we're over halfway. Tom's cave is well protected. He'll be fine until we reach him." They pressed on, the trail growing steeper and more treacherous. Eleanor's world narrowed to the path immediately ahead, to placing each step carefully, to maintaining balance against the gusting wind. Ice formed on her eyelashes, snow caked her clothing, but she pushed forward with grim determination. "There," Jasper finally called, pointing toward a dark shadow in the cliff face. "The cave." Thomas lay wrapped in Jasper's heavy coat, his face pale but alert in the firelight. His left arm hung at an unnatural angle, and he grimaced with each breath, but he managed a weak smile when he saw his mother. "Ma," he said, voice strained with pain. "Sorry to cause trouble." Eleanor knelt beside him, professional calm overtaking maternal fear. She'd helped birth babies, tended injured children, dealt with farming accidents. Now that training served her well as she examined her son's injuries. "Dislocated shoulder, as you said," she confirmed to Jasper, "and at least 2 ribs. We need to set that shoulder before we move him." Jasper nodded grimly. "You know how?" "In theory, I've read about it, seen it done once, but I'll talk you through it. Done it plenty of times for hunting partners." Working together, they positioned Thomas carefully. Eleanor gripped his arm as Jasper had shown her, feeling for the proper angle. At Jasper's nod, she pulled steadily while rotating the limb, feeling the joint resist, then suddenly slip back into place with an audible pop. Thomas cried out once, then went limp, unconscious from the pain. Eleanor quickly bound his arm to his chest, wrapping his ribs for support. Only when she'd finished did she allow herself to stroke his hair gently, whispering reassurances he couldn't hear. "We need to move," Jasper said, studying the storm beyond the cave mouth. "It's only getting worse." They rigged a travois from saplings and rope, padding it with pine boughs and their spare coats. Thomas stirred as they moved him, moaning softly but remaining mercifully unconscious. Eleanor tucked blankets around him, then helped Jasper secure the drag poles. The journey down proved even more challenging than the ascent. Jasper pulled the travois while Eleanor steadied it from behind, preventing it from sliding sideways on steep sections. The storm had become a full blizzard, visibility reduced to mere feet, wind shrieking like a living thing. Time lost all meaning in the white fury. Eleanor's world contracted to the next step, the next breath, the constant effort to keep Thomas's unconscious form stable. Her hands went numb despite thick gloves, her face stung from driven snow, but she endured through sheer will. "Eleanor!" Jasper's voice came from what seemed like a great distance. "The tree line! We're almost there!" She looked up, realizing they'd descended farther than she'd thought. The dense pines provided some shelter from the wind, and ahead, yes, the warm glow of windows shone through the storm. Home. Grace met them at the door, her young face composed despite obvious worry. She'd prepared everything. Hot water, clean bandages, the bed made ready with fresh linens. Samuel helped maneuver the travois inside, while little Mary watched wide-eyed from the corner. Together, Eleanor and Jasper transferred Thomas to his bed. The boy woke during the process, teeth chattering from cold and shock. Eleanor spooned warm broth between his blue lips, while Jasper built up the fire until the cabin fairly glowed with heat. "His color's better," Eleanor said after an hour of careful tending. "The shoulders back in place, ribs bound properly. He'll be sore for weeks, but he'll heal." Only then did she notice her own condition, clothing soaked, hands trembling. From exhaustion, a deep chill that seemed to reach her bones, Jasper appeared with a blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders with unexpected gentleness. "You did well up there," he said quietly. "Most would have panicked, made mistakes. You stayed calm, did what needed doing." Eleanor met his eyes, seeing in them something that made her breath catch. "I had a good teacher." "No," he said firmly. "That wasn't teaching. That was you, your strength, your courage. I just showed you it was there." The storm raged through the night, but inside the cabin, warmth and safety prevailed. Eleanor dozed in a chair beside Thomas's bed, waking periodically to check his breathing, his temperature, the security of his bindings. Each time she woke, she found Jasper watching from across the room, keeping his own vigil. Near dawn, the wind finally died. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, marveling at the transformed landscape. Nearly 2 feet of snow had fallen, turning their clearing into a pristine wonderland. The rising sun painted the mountains pink and gold, achingly beautiful in the crystal air. "First real snow of the season," Jasper said, joining her. "Early this year, going to be a hard winter." Eleanor nodded, but the prospect no longer frightened her. Their woodpile was stacked high, meat hung in plenty, root cellar full of preserved food. More than that, she had skills now, knowledge, confidence in her ability to face whatever came. "We're ready," she said simply. Jasper studied her profile. "In the morning light." "Yes," he agreed. "You are." Something in his tone made her turn. "You sound like you're saying goodbye." He was quiet for a long moment. "Town reviews in 4 days. You'll pass easily after that." He shrugged. "My work here's done. You don't need me anymore." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. "I see." She forced her voice to remain steady. "Of course, we always knew this was temporary." "Did we?" Jasper asked softly. "Seems to me some things changed along the way, things neither of us expected." Eleanor's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "What things?" Instead of answering, Jasper reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. The gesture was intimate, tender, speaking volumes without words. "I'm not Robert," he said finally. "I don't make promises I can't keep or offer what I don't have to give. But these weeks, this place, your family..." He paused, struggling with words. "I've been alone so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere." Eleanor turned to face him fully, hope blooming in her chest. "Then don't leave. It's not that simple. The town already talks. A single woman, a wandering trapper. Your reputation." "Hang my reputation," Eleanor said fiercely. "I've survived abandonment, near starvation, the town's contempt. I've learned to shoot, trap, track, survive in country that terrifies most. Do you think I care what Augusta Pike whispers behind her counter?" Jasper's weathered face softened. "You're a remarkable woman, Eleanor Hartwell. And you're a remarkable man. But more than that, you're family now. The children adore you. They need you." She paused, gathering courage. "I need you." The admission hung between them in the cold morning air. Jasper stood very still, his grey eyes searching hers. Then, slowly, he reached out and drew her into his arms. Eleanor melted against him, feeling the solid strength of his chest, breathing. In the scent of wood smoke and pine that clung to his clothes, his arms tightened around her, and she felt him press his lips to her hair. "I stopped believing I'd ever have this again," he murmured. "Family, home, someone to care for. Then stop running from it," Eleanor whispered against his chest. "Stay." They stood wrapped in each other as the sun climbed higher, painting the snow-covered world in shades of gold and blue. Inside the cabin, children stirred, Grace preparing breakfast, Samuel tending the fire, Mary chattering to her injured brother. normal sounds of family life that had become precious beyond measure. Finally, Jasper pulled back enough to look into Eleanor's eyes. "The town review, we'll face it together," Eleanor said firmly. "Whatever they decide, we'll handle it. But I won't pretend anymore that this is just a business arrangement. Not to them, not to the children, and not to ourselves." A slow smile spread across Jasper's face, the first genuine, unguarded smile she'd seen from him. It transformed, his weathered features revealing the younger man he'd once been. "Then I suppose I'd better make myself presentable for meeting the town council properly," he said. "Can't have them thinking you've taken up with some wild mountain man." Eleanor laughed, the sound bright in the crisp air. "But that's exactly what I've done, and I wouldn't have it any other way." As they turned to go inside, Jasper caught her hand. "Eleanor, there's something else, something I should have told you before." Her heart stuttered. "What?" "The railroad's coming through next spring. Surveyor told me months ago. Your land sits right along the proposed route. That's why the town's been so eager to see you fail. They want to buy you out cheap before word spreads." Eleanor stared at him, pieces of a puzzle suddenly falling into place. The council's urgency, Powell's attempted land grab, the bankers' sudden interest in their welfare. "How long have you known?" "Suspected from the start. Confirmed it that day I went to town alone for supplies." He squeezed her hand. "I should have told you sooner, but I wanted you to find your strength for the right reasons, for yourself and your children, not for money or spite." Eleanor considered this, then surprised herself by laughing. "You know what? You were right. These weeks have shown me what really matters. Let the railroad come. Let the town scheme. We'll be ready for whatever happens." "Together?" Jasper asked, his voice carrying a weight of hope and promise. "Together," Eleanor confirmed, and sealed the promise with a kiss as the morning sun blessed their new beginning. Inside the cabin, Grace glanced out the window and smiled at what she saw. She turned to her siblings, her young face wise beyond her years. "I think," she announced, setting plates on the table, "our family just got a little bigger." Thomas, propped up in bed despite his injuries, grinned through his pain. "About time. Ma's been making moon eyes at Mr. Blackwood for weeks." "Have not," Eleanor protested as she entered, her cheeks flushed with cold and something else entirely. "Have too," Samuel chimed in. Even Mary noticed. "Mr. Jasper's staying?" Mary asked hopefully. "Forever and ever?" Jasper knelt beside the little girl's chair, his expression serious. "If you'll have me, little one, think you could put up with a gruff old trapper cluttering up your home?" Mary threw her arms around his neck. "You're not gruff. You're perfect." Over the child's head, Jasper's eyes met Eleanor's. In them, she saw reflection of her own joy, her own wonder at how tragedy had led to triumph, how loss had opened the door to something richer than she'd ever imagined. The town review still loomed. The railroad's arrival would bring massive changes, and winter promised to test every skill they'd learned. But none of that mattered in this moment of perfect contentment, surrounded by family, the one she'd born, and the one she'd chosen, in a home built on love rather than mere survival. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white. But inside the Hartwell cabin, warmth reigned, the warmth of belonging, of purpose, of hearts that had found their way home at last. Dawn broke cold and crystalline over Bear Hollow as Eleanor stood before her wardrobe, considering what to wear for the town review. Her hands lingered on the fine wool dress she'd worn as a teacher in Boston, navy blue with pearl buttons, carefully preserved through all their hardships. She pulled it from its hanger, then hesitated. "Wear the doeskin," Jasper suggested from the doorway. He'd been up since before first light, checking trap lines despite the deep snow. The one Grace made. Eleanor fingered the beautifully crafted tunic, soft as butter, and decorated with intricate beadwork her daughter had painstakingly applied. It represented everything she'd become: practical, skilled, connected to this land in ways the town council couldn't imagine. They expect to see a desperate widow, she mused, or perhaps a wild woman corrupted by frontier hardship. Then, give them neither, Jasper replied. Show them who you really are. She met his eyes in the mirror, drawing strength from his steady presence. And who is that? A woman who conquered winter, who learned the language of the wilderness, who saved her family through sheer will. He crossed to stand behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. A woman I'm proud to stand beside. Eleanor leaned back against him, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability before the battle ahead. What if they still vote against us? What if they try to take the children? Then they'll face something they don't expect: united resistance. You're not alone anymore, Eleanor. The Hartwell family has allies now. She turned in his arms, curious. What do you mean? Oh? Slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. You'll see. Get dressed. We leave in an hour. The ride to Willow Creek took them through a transformed landscape. 2 feet of snow had fallen in the past week, turning the familiar trail into a winter wonderland. Eleanor rode confidently on the sure-footed mare Jasper had traded for, while he managed a sledge loaded with goods, pelts for trading, preserved meat for the general store, and several mysterious bundles he wouldn't explain. The children followed on foot, even Thomas insisting on walking despite his still tender ribs. They moved as a unit now, watchful and coordinated, reading the forest signs Jasper had taught them. When a pine grosbeak called from a nearby branch, Samuel immediately identified it, while Grace pointed out the subtle differences between deer and elk tracks in the fresh snow. As they neared town, Eleanor noticed other travelers converging on the main road. The Hendersons from the neighboring valley, the Clearwater family from upstream, even the reclusive Finnish trapper Koskinen, all heading toward Willow Creek. Word travels, Jasper explained, noting her surprise. Mountain folk take care of their own. The town square bustled with unusual activity for a cold December morning. Eleanor counted at least 30 people gathered near the courthouse, far more than typically attended council meetings. As their group approached, conversations stilled, heads turned. Eleanor straightened in her saddle, meeting curious gazes with calm dignity. She wore the doe-skin tunic over wool trousers, her hair braided in the practical style Grace had perfected, the Hawken rifle secured to her saddle. Not the desperate widow they'd dismissed, nor the scandalous woman they'd gossiped about, but something entirely unexpected. A frontier matriarch in her own right. Mayor Briggs emerged from the courthouse, his florid face registering shock at the crowd. Behind him came the council members, Peterson, Holbrook, Powell, and Judge Wheaton, from the county seat. Sheriff Garrett stood to one side, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Hartwell, the mayor blustered, this is a closed session. These observers aren't permitted. Public meeting. Public attendance, a gruff voice called out. Hendricks, the blacksmith, pushed through the crowd, his massive frame imposing. Nothing in the town charter says otherwise. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled mountain folk. Eleanor recognized faces she'd seen only in passing. Trappers, homesteaders, small farmers who usually avoided town politics. Ishuam had come to witness this judgment. Now see here, Briggs began, but Judge Wheaton raised a hand. The blacksmith's correct, Cornelius. Public meetings are open to all citizens. Shall we proceed inside? The courthouse couldn't accommodate everyone, but the mountain folk packed in nonetheless, lining walls and filling the gallery. Eleanor and her family took seats at the front, Jasper standing behind her chair like a guardian sentinel. Mayor, Briggs called the session to order, his usual pomposity somewhat deflated by the unexpected audience. We're here to evaluate the fitness of Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell to maintain custody of her children and possession of her homestead. Council members will present their findings. Peterson the banker stood first, adjusting his spectacles nervously. 3 months ago, following the abandonment by Robert Hartwell, this council expressed concern about Mrs. Hartwell's ability to provide adequate care and shelter for 4 children through winter. We established criteria for evaluation: sufficient food stores, adequate shelter maintenance, proper education for the children, and general household stability. He paused, consulting his notes. Upon inspection this week, we found... "Get on with it, Peterson," someone called from the gallery. "We all know what they found." The banker colored but continued. "We found stores sufficient for winter and beyond. The household appears, or adequately managed." Adequately? Eleanor rose smoothly to her feet. "Perhaps the council would like specific details." "We have 300 pounds of preserved meat, 200 pounds of root vegetables, 50 pounds of dried berries, 30 pounds of rendered fat, plus trade goods valued at over $200. Our woodshed holds 4 cords of seasoned hardwood, with another 2 cords of pine for kindling. The cabin has been weatherproofed, the roof repaired, and a new cold storage room added." She moved to stand in the center of the room, commanding, "Attention! My children continue their education daily. Thomas can now calculate timber yields and track complex trade negotiations. Grace has mastered botanical medicine and food preservation techniques used by the Chinook tribes. Samuel reads at 2 grade levels above his age and can navigate by stars. Even Mary has learned her letters and numbers while developing skills in plant identification." "That's all very well," Powell interjected, his thin face pinched with disapproval, "but the matter of moral fitness remains. You've had a man living in your home, unchaperoned for weeks. What example does this set?" A dangerous glint appeared in Eleanor's eyes. "The example of survival, Mr. Powell. The example of learning from those with knowledge to share. Mr. Blackwood has served as teacher, protector, and friend to my family. His presence saved us from starvation and gave my children skills they'll use for life." "But the impropriety," Powell began. "Impropriety," Eleanor's voice rose. "Where was your concern for propriety when you tried to force me into selling my land for a fraction of its value? When you refused fair prices at your store? When this entire council was prepared to let children starve rather than bend your precious rules? Furthermore," she continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I wonder at your sudden moral concern, Mr. Powell, particularly given what Mr. Blackwood discovered during his recent trip to the county seat." Powell's face went pale. "I don't know what you mean." Jasper stepped forward, pulling papers from his coat. "Railroad Surveyor's office had interesting records. Seems Mr. Powell here has been buying up land rights all along the proposed route, using his position as merchant to pressure struggling homesteaders into selling cheap." Shocked murmurs ran through the crowd. Judge Wheaton leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. "Is this true, Powell?" "Business investments," Powell stammered. "Perfectly legal." "Legal, perhaps," Eleanor interjected. "Ethical. That's another question, but it certainly explains the urgency to have me declared unfit. My land sits directly on the proposed route, doesn't it, Mr. Powell?" The revelation shifted the room's entire dynamic. Mountain folk who'd remained, neutral now, glared at Powell with open hostility. Even council members edged away from the merchant. Mayor Briggs attempted to regain control. "The railroad matter is separate from today's evaluation. We must focus on Mrs. Hartwell's fitness as a parent and homesteader." "Then let's discuss that," Eleanor said. "But let's discuss it honestly. This review was never about my children's welfare. It was about control. Control of land, of social order, of women who refuse to conform to your narrow expectations. She turned to address the packed courthouse. I came to this territory as Robert Hartwell's wife, trained for drawing rooms and schoolhouses. When he abandoned us, you expected me to crumble, to beg for charity, to slink back east in defeat. Instead, I chose to learn, to adapt, to become what my children needed. Her voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. I learned to read the forest like a book, to track game across snow and stone, to preserve meat and tan hides. My hands grew calloused from axe work and trap setting. My aim became true enough to defend against predators. I can build a shelter that will stand against winter storms, start a fire in a blizzard, find food where others see only wilderness. She paused, letting her words sink in. But more than survival skills, I learned something profound, that the frontier doesn't care about your past, your gender, or your social standing. It judges only by competence, determination, and the courage to keep going when everything seems lost. Pretty words, Holbrook the sawmill owner interrupted, but this isn't about your personal journey. It's about those children. You're right, Eleanor agreed. Let's talk about my children. Thomas, stand up. Her eldest rose tall. For his 11 years, shoulders square. Thomas tracked and helped bring down an elk last week. He can calculate lumber values, repair harnesses, and has memorized every healing plant within 5 miles of our home. More importantly, he's learned responsibility, compassion, and the value of hard work. Grace, Eleanor continued. Her daughter stood, poised, despite her 9 years. Grace preserved enough food to see us through 2 winters. She can identify medicinal plants the Chinook tribes have used for generations, set a broken bone, and teach letters to children half her age. She's become a healer and teacher. Samuel, the 7-year-old, bounced to his feet, eager despite the formal setting. Samuel tracked a fox family for 3 weeks, mapping their movements and learning their habits without disturbing them. He reads everything he can find and writes daily observations about wildlife behavior. He's becoming a naturalist, and Mary, the youngest, stood on her chair to be seen, drawing smiles from the gallery. At 4 years old, Mary can identify which berries are safe to eat, help tend trap lines, and shows more courage than many adults. She faced down a curious bear by making noise instead of running. Eleanor's voice filled with pride. These aren't the same frightened children you dismissed 3 months ago. They're capable, confident, connected to this land in ways that will serve them all their lives. And they did it not through your charity or guidance, but through their own strength and the teaching of a man you consider improper. That brings us back to the matter of Mr. Blackwood, Mayor Briggs said stiffly. His presence in your home will become permanent, Eleanor announced, her voice ringing clear. Jasper Blackwood and I plan to marry. Spring wedding if the pass is clear early. The courthouse erupted. Mountain folk cheered and applauded, while council members sputtered in shock. Through it all, Eleanor stood calm and dignified. Jasper's hand now resting openly on her shoulder. Judge Wheaton's gavel finally restored order. This puts a different complexion on matters. Mr. Blackwood, do you confirm this intention? Jasper stepped forward. I do, Your Honor. I've lived alone in these mountains for 15 years, ever since losing my first family to fever. Thought I'd never want that responsibility again. But Eleanor Hartwell and her children reminded me what it means to belong somewhere, to have people worth protecting and providing for. His weathered face showed rare emotion. This woman faced down a grizzly to save her children, learned skills in weeks that take most folks years to master, and never once complained or gave up hope. Her children show the same steel. I'd be honored to call them family. But you're not married yet, Powell interjected desperately. The current situation remains improper. Improper? A new voice spoke from the gallery. Mrs. Chen, The Chinese herbalist who rarely attended town functions stood up. "I sell herbs to Mrs. Hartwell. She pay fair price. Treat me with respect when others cross street to avoid me. She learn our medicine, share her food when our garden failed. This is improper." Koskinen the Finn stood next. "She traded fair for pelts, helped my nephew when he was injured, never cheated or looked down. In my country, we judge by actions, not words." One by one, mountain folk rose to speak. Stories emerged of Eleanor's quiet kindness, sharing preserved food with struggling families, teaching children to read, providing herbal remedies without payment. The portrait that emerged wasn't of a desperate widow or scandalous woman, but of someone who'd become integral to the mountain community. "Enough," Judge Wheaton declared finally. "I've heard sufficient testimony. The purpose of this review was to determine if Mrs. Hartwell could provide for her children through winter. The evidence overwhelmingly confirms she can. More than that, she's shown exceptional adaptation to frontier life." He fixed the local council with a stern gaze. "As for propriety, I see a woman who secured education and protection for her children by whatever legal means necessary. The fact that affection grew from that arrangement speaks to the character of both parties, not against it." "But the railroad," Powell began. "The railroad negotiations are a separate matter," the judge cut him off. "Though I suggest the territorial attorney might be interested in examining certain land acquisition practices." Powell shrank back, his schemes exposed and influence shattered. Judge Wheaton turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Hartwell, this court finds you fully capable of maintaining custody of your children and possession of your homestead. Moreover, I commend your remarkable transformation and your contribution to this community." The courthouse erupted in celebration. Mountain folk surrounded Eleanor and her family, offering congratulations and promises of wedding gifts. Through the crowd, she caught sight of Sheriff Garrett approaching. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I knew what Powell was doing, suspected the railroad connection, should have spoken up sooner." Eleanor studied him for a moment, then offered her hand. "We all make choices, Sheriff. What matters is making better ones going forward." As the crowd moved outside, Agnes Pike emerged from the general store, her pinched face uncertain. She'd watched the proceedings from her window, seen the town's judgment reversed. Her husband's ally, Powell, disgraced. "Mrs. Hartwell," she called hesitantly. "Eleanor, wait." Eleanor paused, her family gathering protectively around her. Agnes approached slowly, her usual superior air replaced by something like humility. "I was wrong," she said simply. "Wrong to judge, wrong to refuse fair trade, wrong about everything. Can you forgive a foolish woman's pride?" Eleanor considered the woman who'd made those first desperate weeks so much harder. Then she glanced at her children, at Jasper, at the mountain folk who'd become her true community. "The frontier teaches us all," she said finally. "Some learn faster than others. Your store serves this community, Mrs. Pike. Serve it fairly, and we'll all benefit." Agnes nodded, relief plain on her face. "The railroad will bring changes. Town will need leadership. Real leadership, not schemes and prejudice. Perhaps you'd consider joining the council." The suggestion surprised everyone, Eleanor most of all. But as she considered it, the idea took root. Why shouldn't those who truly understood frontier life guide its development? "We'll see," she said diplomatically. "First, there's a wedding to plan." As the Hartwell Blackwood family prepared to leave town, Jasper loaded the sledge with supplies, freely offered by neighbors and newly respectful merchants. Eleanor watched her children interact with townspeople. Thomas discussing lumber grades with Holbrook, Grace trading remedies with Mrs. Chen, Samuel excitedly sharing his wildlife observations with anyone who'd listen. "Regrets?" Jasper asked, coming to stand beside her. Eleanor looked out over Willow Creek, then toward the mountains that had become her true home. None. Though I wonder what Robert would think if he could see us now. Does it matter? She considered this. No, he made his choice. We made ours. As they rode out of town, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment, from desperate abandonment to triumphant vindication, from helpless dependency to capable leadership, from isolation to community. The trail home wound through stands of pine and fir, their branches heavy with snow. Weak winter sunlight filtered through, creating patterns of light and shadow on the pristine surface. Eleanor breathed deeply, tasting the clean mountain air, feeling the rhythm of her mare's steady gait. "Ma," Thomas called from behind, "when spring comes, could we build an addition to the cabin? If we're going to be a bigger family." Eleanor smiled, exchanging glances with Jasper. "I think that's a fine idea. What did you have in mind?" As Thomas outlined his plans, supported by eager suggestions from his siblings, Eleanor marveled at their confidence. These were not the same frightened children who'd huddled in terror that first night after Robert's desertion. They were young, frontiers people now, capable and assured. The cabin appeared through the trees as afternoon shadows lengthened. Smoke rose from the chimney. Grace had run ahead to start the fire. The structure stood solid against the winter landscape, expanded and improved from the simple homestead Robert had built. This was more than just a house now. It was a true home, earned through struggle, built on determination, and filled with love that had grown from the most unlikely circumstances. As they dismounted, Mary tugged on Jasper's coat. "Mr. Jasper." "Yes, little one?" "When you marry Mama, can I call you Papa?" Jasper knelt in the snow, his grey eyes gentle. "I'd be honored, Mary, though I think we should ask your brothers and sisters how they feel too." "We already talked about it," Grace said, appearing in the doorway. "We decided yes." "When?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "Weeks ago," Thomas admitted. "Right after you went up the mountain in that blizzard to save me, the way you looked at each other when you got back. We knew." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, tears of joy, of gratitude, of wonder at her children's wisdom. "And you're all sure this is what you want?" "Ma," Samuel said with 7-year-old certainty, "Mr. Jasper teaches us stuff, protects us, makes you smile like Papa never did. Course we're sure." That evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, laden with venison stew, fresh bread and preserved berries, Eleanor looked at each face in the lamplight. Her children, healthy and confident. Jasper, the unexpected gift who'd taught them all to survive. This was her family, forged in hardship but tempered by love. "A toast," Jasper proposed, raising his cup of pine needle tea. "To new beginnings." "To family," Eleanor added. "To home," the children chorused. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. But inside the Hartwell cabin, soon to be the Blackwood cabin, warmth and laughter pushed back the winter darkness. Later, after the children were asleep, Eleanor and Jasper sat by the fire planning their future. The railroad would bring changes, prosperity for some, challenges for others. But they would face it together, with skills earned through struggle and bonds strengthened by adversity. "No more secrets," Eleanor said suddenly. "If we're to build a life together, I need to know. Are there other things you haven't told me? About the railroad, the town, anything?" Jasper was quiet for a moment. "There's talk of making Willow Creek a proper station stop. Your land would become valuable, not just for the route, but for development. Hotels, stores, shipping facilities. You could be a wealthy woman if you play it right." "We could be wealthy," Eleanor corrected, "though wealth isn't what I want most." "What do you want?" She looked into the flames, considering. "Safety for my children, purpose in my days, connection to this land that tested us and made us stronger, and," she met his eyes, someone to share it all with, someone who sees me as I am, not as they think I should be. You have all that, Jasper said softly, and more. As the fire burned low, they made plans. Jasper would continue trapping, but establish a permanent base at the homestead. Eleanor would expand her teaching, perhaps start a proper school as the town grew. The children would learn both wilderness skills and formal education, prepared for whatever future they chose. When Judge Wheaton married them in the small church come spring, the ceremony would be simple. Mountain folk would gather, bringing practical gifts and good wishes. Agnes Pike would provide the wedding cake, her prejudices forgotten in the face of Eleanor's quiet dignity. Even Powell, chastened and diminished, would attend, a reminder that redemption was possible for those who chose it. But all that lay in the future. Tonight, as Eleanor climbed the stairs to check on her sleeping children one last time, she paused at the window. Moonlight turned the snow-covered clearing to silver, the dark forest beyond holding no more terrors. She'd traveled so far from the frightened woman who'd watched her husband disappear down this very trail, that Eleanor, refined, dependent, limited by others' expectations, seemed like someone from another life. In her place stood a woman who'd earned her place in this harsh, beautiful land. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The railroad's arrival would transform their quiet valley. Her appointment to the town council would thrust her into politics she'd once avoided. Marriage to Jasper would bind their families officially, creating new dynamics to navigate. But tonight, she was simply a mother who'd saved her children, a woman who'd found unexpected love, a soul who'd discovered strength she never knew she possessed. As she turned from the window, Eleanor caught her reflection in the dark glass. The face looking back was leaner, marked by sun and wind, framed by hair grown long and practical. But the eyes held a light that had been absent in her Boston days, absent in her early marriage, absent until desperation had forced her to become who she was meant to be. Downstairs, Jasper banked the fire and checked the locks. Habits from his solitary years that now served to protect their family. Eleanor heard his footsteps on the stairs, felt the solid reassurance of his presence. This wasn't the life she'd planned, wasn't the happily ever after of fairy tales. It was something better, a happiness earned through struggle, a family bound by choice rather than obligation, a future built on the bedrock of mutual respect and hard-won wisdom. As sleep claimed her, Eleanor's last thought was a prayer of gratitude for the strength that had carried her through the dark times, for the man who'd appeared when she needed him most, for children who'd risen to every challenge, and for the mysterious ways hardship could transform into blessing, abandonment into freedom, and desperate survival into triumphant living. The mountains stood eternal guard outside their windows, witnesses to one small human drama among countless others. But for Eleanor Hartwell, soon to be Eleanor Blackwood, this particular drama had reached its perfect conclusion. Not an ending, really, but a beginning. The beginning of a life chosen rather than accepted, created rather than endured. And in the Montana Territory of 1867, on the cusp of great changes, that was no small victory. It was, in fact, everything. Spring arrived early in 1868. Painting Bear Hollow with wildflowers and filling the air with snowmelt music. As Eleanor stood beside Jasper in the little church, surrounded by their children and the mountain community that had become family, she thought once more of that desperate winter morning when her world had shattered. "Do you, Eleanor Hartwell, take this man?" Reverend Colton's words faded as memories flickered past. The crack of breaking furniture, 4 frightened faces, the seemingly impossible task of survival. And then, Jasper, emerging from the forest. Like an answer to prayers she hadn't known she was praying. "I do," she said firmly, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed church. Grace stood as her witness, radiant in a dress she'd sewn herself. Thomas managed the rings with careful pride. Samuel and Mary flanked them, beaming at their new family configuration. As Jasper slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, Eleanor felt the final piece of her transformation click into place. Not because she needed a man to complete her, she'd proven her independence thoroughly, but because she'd chosen this partnership, earned it, created it from mutual respect and unexpected love. By the power vested in me, Reverend Colton concluded, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The kiss that sealed their union was gentle, a promise rather than a claim. Around them, the congregation erupted in celebration. Mountain folk who understood that the strongest bonds were forged in hardship's fire. Outside the church, spring sunshine blessed the gathering. Tables groaned under potluck offerings. Fiddles tuned up for dancing. Children ran between the adults. Eleanor's four leading a pack of youngsters in some elaborate game. Happy? Jasper asked, his arm around her waist as they watched the festivities. Complete, Eleanor corrected. Though I reserve the right to be happier still when the railroad pays us for the right of way across our land. He chuckled. Ever practical. I do believe I've married a businesswoman. You've married a survivor, Eleanor said, who learned that survival means more than just staying alive. It means building something worth preserving. As the celebration continued into the evening, Eleanor noticed changes in the town's dynamics. Agnes Pike chatted cordially with Mrs. Chen. Powell, his schemes exposed and influence broken, helped serve food with genuine humility. Sheriff Garrett organized games for the children, his earlier weakness replaced by quiet determination to serve better. The frontier had tested them all, broken some, strengthened others. But it had also created community from isolation, family from strangers, hope from desperation. Time for the toast, someone called. Judge Wheaton raised his glass. To the Blackwood family, may your union be as strong as the mountains, as enduring as the pines, and as beautiful as this valley you've made your home. Hear, hear, the crowd chorused. But it was Thomas who gave the toast that brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Standing straight and tall, he raised his cup of cider. To our mother, who showed us that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best. Things that happen for us, and to Jasper, who taught us that family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up when you need them most. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Eleanor stood surrounded by her family, the one she'd been born to, the one she'd borne, and the one she'd chosen. The brass bell she'd once seen as mockery now rang out news of their joy, its sound carrying across the valley like a benediction. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The railroad construction would start soon, transforming their quiet valley. Eleanor's position on the town council would demand difficult decisions. The children would grow, pulled between wilderness wisdom and civilization's call. But tonight was for celebration, for dancing under stars, for marking the moment when survival transformed into triumph. As Jasper swept her into a waltz, Eleanor caught sight of their children dancing together, Thomas carefully guiding Mary through the steps, while Grace and Samuel laughed at their own missteps. Beyond them, the mountains stood eternal, witnesses to this small human victory. No regrets? Jasper asked, echoing his question from months before. Eleanor smiled, her heart so full it might burst. Only that it took a tragedy to lead us to this happiness. Sometimes that's the way of things, he replied, spinning her under his arm. The hardest trails lead to the most beautiful views. And as spring stars emerged one by one above Bear Hollow, blessing the Blackwood family's new beginning, Eleanor knew he was right. The trail had been hard indeed, heartbreak, abandonment, near starvation, desperate struggle. But the view, from here, it was magnificent. The music played on, the dancers whirled, and somewhere in the darkness, a mountain lion called. Not a threat now, but simply another voice in the vast chorus of the wilderness that had tested her, taught her, and ultimately welcomed her home. This was her place now, earned through courage she hadn't known she possessed. This was her family, bound by choice and strengthened by adversity. This was her life. Not the one she'd planned, but the one she'd fought for and won. And it was. Perfect. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.